Good evening. I'm here with the conductor, Leonard Slatkin, and it is such an honor to be hosting you, Leonard, because we go way back. In fact, Mr. Slatkin changed my life, which is another whole story, but I just want to introduce him first. This is a conductor who has been all over the world, has conducted, I think, every major orchestra in the world, and some minor orchestras too.
And orchestras that are not in this world.
Oh, okay. I've conducted a few of those too. Yeah. And he's just had an unbelievable career. And of course, out of this, he won 6 Grammys with 35 nominations, which is no small feat. And he has conducted 3 major orchestras in the United States, or had tenure with them: the St. Louis Symphony, the Detroit Symphony, and the National Symphony in Kennedy Center. Also abroad, he was the main conductor of the BBC Symphony and the Orchestra National de Lyon in France. I'm so happy to have you here.
I'm thrilled to be
and
here,
I
Joan.
think the musicians are too,
Well.
because you bring so much experience and so much knowledge of these pieces that you're actually conducting to. And I'd like to talk about those pieces because you have a very special relationship to these pieces. Let's talk about Pictures at an Exhibition, which everybody knows is an iconic and one of the strongest pieces. It used to be a piano piece, and it was orchestrated by
Many people.
many people. Now tell us your connection to Pictures.
So as a work that is well known in the symphonic canon in the orchestration by Maurice Ravel, I knew of a couple others. This is about 30 years ago. And I started doing a different one, in particular the one by the Russian bandmaster named Sergei Gorchkov, which adhered closer to the original piano version. Ravel made a lot of changes, changed notes, took out one whole promenade, changed harmonies, changed dynamics. Gorchkov tried to get a little closer to what Mussorgsky wrote. But other people went the other direction, and including Leopold Stokowski, of course. There were 2 other versions written before Ravel's, and so far, as of now, there are at least 45 different orchestrations of this piece. And we're not talking about the rock version by Emerson, Lake and Palmer, or the new agey one by Tomita for electronics. We're talking about actual orchestral transcriptions. And I decided that more people needed to know about the alternatives that were out there, now that the majority of listeners knew Pictures in the Exhibition from the Ravel version. So I started compiling composites, where one movement would be from one orchestrator, and then the next was by another, and then by another. And I put that together. And it was a lot of fun, and people liked it. So then I made a second version in which I thought, let me see if I can put one together of the orchestrations that are perhaps the most outlandish. These included A Great Gate of Kiev, made by an Australian named Douglas Gamely, where not only is there an orchestra there, there's a chorus and an organ. It's just really over the top. I did another one by a man named Leonardo Leonardi. His version of whatever piece it was changed the key altogether. So that one I only did a couple times. And then I decided, what is it that we think is wrong with the Ravel? Maybe it's not so bad after all, with the changes. So I went back, looked at the Ravel, and said, maybe I could incorporate some of the piano version into the existing orchestration by Ravel. That's the version we're going to hear at these concerts. So what you'll notice, it's a little different, some dynamics where, for example, in Beadlo, the ox cart, in the Ravel version, it starts with the ox cart in the distance, gradually getting louder. But in the piano version, the ox cart is right there, front and center at the beginning. So we started loud instead of soft, and instead of a tuba solo, the tuba is amplified with 4 horns. Then there's the promenade that comes in between Goldenberg and Schmöhle and the Limoges, the marketplace. Ravel left that piece out altogether. So I put that back in and orchestrated it in a way similar to the opening promenade. The only place where I really thought that I couldn't go back to the Mussorgsky was the very ending of the piece. Ravel's ending is so good and works very well. The Mussorgsky on the piano makes sense, but it doesn't in the orchestra. When you have a group that can actually make a crescendo without a piano having to do a tremolo, you want to take advantage of that, and Ravel did. So I keep the Ravel ending as it was. I've done this a few times. All the versions have been recorded in some way, so one could have a comparative version. But also there are recordings of other orchestrations that are made. Maybe one day it would be fun to just spend 2 months, record every version of pictures, and with technology today, you can make up your own compilation if you want.
Right.
You should do one. Why not?
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah.
But,
You pointed out at the rehearsal, you don't like the way the catacombs works in this orchestration of Ravel. Go for it. You do one. I'll play it.
it's got problems in the piano part.
Yeah, I know.
That's the problem.
Mostly because the piano can't sustain.
That's right, yeah, but also the pitches are very strange.
Go ahead.
But, this piece, I think, maybe I'm wrong, but I think the reason it's orchestrated and paid so much attention to is because, first of all, it's a powerful piece. It has an amazing set of profiles and narrative. And also it uses the range and timbres of the piano so that it can go across the whole orchestra, up and down.
Yeah. But pianists also monkey around with it. Horowitz has a very famous transcription that he did, where he alters all kinds of things.
He was
in
always
the piano.
messing around with
Yeah, but
everything.
it's fine. But it was fine. He made the piano sound like an orchestra. That was his job. So the surprise to me always was, why this piece and not, say, Carnaval of Schumann?
Yeah.
It's another piece of, short little excerpts. Now, Ravel himself did orchestrate 5 movements of Carnaval, but not the whole thing. Just pictures, I think, because the idea of a work where there's potential visual imagery makes people want to imagine. So when we have the old castle, that's what it's called. Most people never saw the picture of it. We don't know what the Hartmann looks like, or some people do. But in your head, you can say, if I was writing something like the old castle, this is how it would sound. I think that's the attraction of the piece.
Well, it has a life that's been really living a long time and powerfully, not to mention
But in
all
this
the
case, since we
orchestration.
have so many young musicians who are going to go on and have careers and will play pictures many times in their
Yes,
lives,
yes.
this gives them a chance mostly to get the idea of what they're going to be encountering with Ravel, but also gives them the idea of there are other possibilities
Yes,
too.
right. Well, the Brahmsiana, which is a premiere arrangement. This is the first time this is being heard. Tell us about how that came about.
Every one of us had to figure out what to do during the pandemic. It was particularly difficult for conductors. Why? Because unlike the instrumentalists or the vocalists or the composers, it's not something we could do at home. I don't want an orchestra in my living room. But you guys have studios, you can practice, you can do things at your leisure or not, whatever you want to do, but we can't. All we could do maybe was study scores, but we wouldn't know when we might be able to actually put them into practice. I know I spent a little bit of time looking at pieces of music that I'd never conducted and I might never do. For example, the St. Matthew Passion, I've never done it. And I probably won't. It's just one of those pieces that I love dearly, but I know I would never do it justice, so I probably won't. A couple of Bruckner symphonies, which Bruckner is not my cup of tea, but gradually I've been adding one or two into the mix. And then I built on what I did over the last, 8 or 9 years. I've written a few original pieces. One of them was a piece called Endgames. It's very cute. It's for, I call it the Concertino Grosso. So it's a little play on words there. The idea was it's for solo woodwind sextet and strings, but the 6 woodwind players are alto flute, piccolo, English horn, E-flat clarinet, bass clarinet, and contrabassoon. Those are the players that sit on the ends of the woodwind section.
And they
The
never have
extreme.
enough to play.
One, that's one thing, but two, they never sit next to each other.
Oh.
So now they're in a little semicircle at the front of the stage. And it gave me, because you have extreme highs and lows with those instruments, and I had a lot of fun creating a palette of sound where they could interact as chamber musicians.
They
It's
don't
a very,
have that either.
no, this is the only piece like that. This is fun. So I did that, and then I wrote a piece that I was originally to honor my father on his, what would have been his 100th birthday, and then I eventually did it in memory of both my parents, called Kina, means lament in Hebrew.
And both of your parents were musicians, very
much
good
so,
musicians.
very much so.
yeah.
So now comes the pandemic, and I wondered maybe instead of writing something original, what else could I do? One day I was out taking a walk in the neighborhood. I had my earbuds in. I have my phone on shuffle mode all the time, so I don't know what's going to come up next. I have 15,000 tracks or so, and it's all kinds of things, blues, jazz, whatever. And on came the Andante from the 3rd piano quartet of Brahms. And I'm walking and I go, this place in the piano, it says it could be a harp instead of the piano. That might work. And I said, here's a place that oboe could do that. And then I went, after the walk, I went to my office and I started sketching out what this moment would be like if I orchestrated it a little bit. And it came fairly quickly. The sounds in my head were apparent. And after that, I thought, I wonder what else I could do. So I picked a few piano
But wait a
pieces.
minute, didn't your parents have
Yeah.
a distinct involvement? Because your mother was a wonderful cellist,
Father was a
and
violinist.
that has a
conductor.
prominent cello solo in it, yeah.
Well, my parents were one half of the Hollywood String Quartet. And in addition to that, my mother's brother, Victor, was a fantastic pianist. So they recorded all of the Brahms piano quartets and the quintet. So in the quartet, 3 of the 4 members are my relatives.
So that had a personal.
Well, it
personal
had more than that in the personal realm, because when my dad passed away in 1963, he was only 47. My mother selected that recording of the Andante to be played at his memorial, where 1,500 people came, and the eulogy was given by Frank Sinatra.
By who?
Frank Sinatra.
Frank Sinatra?
Yeah.
Oh, because he worked with a lot of those
He worked
people.
with my parents. We were very
Yeah.
close. We knew him very, very well. And then when my mom passed away, I think before I started to cry or mourn, I just went and put the CD of That Slow One on again. So it's a very personal kind of piece to me.
Yeah.
And it's an extraordinary piece, even for Brahms, because it moves harmonically in directions that you don't expect from him. First 2 beats, nice, calm E major. You go, oh, it's going to be great. And then, right on the 3rd beat, he goes to an A minor 6 chord, and it's, what?
Yeah.
No, you don't go from E major to A minor 6. You don't do that. So it's, in some places, almost Wagnerian in the way the harmonies work, but it's also just so gorgeous.
Oh, it's
So that was the first one. And then I picked a couple of piano pieces. I found a 6-part vocal piece that I made for strings. 2 of the arrangements are just for winds with harp, without the strings. I thought that would be nice, and those can be potentially interesting for wind ensembles, but also as encore pieces with orchestras to do. Usually it's a string piece for an encore or something else. And then finally, I wound up as the last piece, the 7th of the bunch, doing the famous Wegenlied, the cradle song. But that one's not a transcription or an orchestration. That's a straight-out arrangement, because it moves from this being a simple little tune into a kind of jazz thing with the trombones moving with strange harmonies and all that, and then a kind of nice little ending. So I kept the original compositional chops. You don't want to get in the way of Brahms, but the cradle song you can.
You could have fun with that
Yeah,
one.
you don't want to get in the way of Brahms, that's for sure. So that leads us to Cindy McTee's circuits. Cindy McTee is Leonard's wife, and they've been married 10
years.
10 years. And she travels with him. She's a wonderful composer who was a professor at the University of North Texas for
Almost 30 years.
Almost 30 years. And she's had her music played all over the place and won lots of awards. And it's a great, fun piece. I really enjoy it because what I enjoy about it is the pacing. She knows how to move a short piece around in a certain amount of segments of time. And also her orchestration with the percussion is fantastic.
And, you know, she's one of those people, you meet her, and then you hear this piece, you go, no, that woman couldn't have written that piece. I mean, she seems like just such a grounded person, you know, and all of a sudden this jazzy thing comes out.
Yeah, but the piece is straight ahead.
It is straight ahead.
That's in common there, right there.
But she, you know, like a lot of composers, changed styles here and there. In the early phases, she was influenced a lot by Penderecki, who was her teacher. And then by George Crumb, like so many people were.
Oh, right.
She wrote circle music pieces, all those kind of things. Circuits is what, 1990, I think you said? Originally for chamber orchestra, then expanded.
1990 and then expanded.
Then there's a band version, now there's going to be a simplified band version.
And now they want to do another version.
Yeah, it's fine.
It has that kind of popularity.
So it's a wonderful piece to do as an opener because it's about 5 minutes long. It's, in a way, falls in that category of contemporary music for people who don't like contemporary music. You know what I mean?
Okay.
Everybody.
How can you not like this
No,
piece?
but this one is fine.
Yeah.
But there's a more important aspect, of course. I like to keep the royalty stream going in the family.
Oh. Oh, okay. That's another reason.
Got to do that.
But you know, that brings up another subject. Your relationship to living composers is very unique. I think Mr. Slatkin has probably performed more living composers than any conductor that I know of. And I think because, which is what is unusual about you and your relationship to living composers is that you are interested in enough of them and you study their music to say, I like this piece or I like this composer and I'm going to back it.
That's right.
And Sidney and I both had this experience where he programmed a piece of ours somewhere and the management rejected it. Mainly either we were a woman or we were living, I don't know what the reasons were, but Leonard said, if you want me, these pieces go with me.
Yep.
And that took a lot of guts because, you know, most conductors don't want to take that kind of stand, especially if it's a major
But
orchestra.
in that sense, I was always a very old-fashioned conductor, going back to days of Toscanini, whatever. They had their composers that they promoted and championed, and they said, I want to be associated with these people. So when I had you as one of the resident composers in St. Louis, along with Schwantner and Erb and all that, I knew your music before I knew you.
Well, I have to say.
It was about the music.
I have to tell this story, which I tell all the time. I had written one orchestra piece called Sequoia, and he got a hold of it through Joe Schwantner, actually, who was the previous composer in residence. And he called me, and no, you wrote to me or you sent it, I can't remember how this went. I want you to be a composer in residence. It was St. Louis. This was a major orchestra. And I was like, but I only have one piece. I wrote to him and I said, I only have one piece. Are you sure? I'm kind of new to the orchestra world and you wrote back, I'll never forget this. You wrote one really interesting piece. I'm going to help you write a lot more.
Yeah.
I never heard that. I mean, that was a big risk for you to
No,
take.
it wasn't.
You know, yes, it was.
Did I ever tell you how Joe became a composer in
No,
residence?
no. This is Joe Schwanner.
Schwanner.
Very interesting composer.
Fantastic composer. So it was going to be the 100th anniversary of the St. Louis Symphony, and I wanted, more than anything, to have a commission from William Schumann, who was my kind of hero.
Yeah, right.
I knew Copland, of course, and I knew him personally, but Schumann was the one to me who had, I don't know, I felt a real kinship with him, maybe because we both love baseball so much, I don't know. So I went to the publisher, which I think back then was Presser, maybe?
I think it was Presser.
So back then, publishers used to actually promote the music of their composers. It's a whole different time than it is now. So I went there, and they had a bunch of scores laid out on the table. And I said, I don't need to look at those. I really want a piece from Bill. And I've already talked to him, and he's anxious to write one. They said, yeah, but since you're here, do you mind taking a look? So I'm looking through it, and then I come across this piece for wind ensemble called And the Mountains Rising Nowhere. Joseph Schwanner. I said, who's Schwanner? And I open it up and I go, whoa. Wow, this is great.
This is a wonderful piece that's played a lot by bands, by Joe
And-
Schwanner.
And immediately I said, well, does he have anything for orchestra? And so he has one piece called Aftertones of Infinity. Also a very good
We
piece.
only had one.
Only one, like you. That's all.
Oh my God!
And
I
it was the
didn't know
same
that.
thing where I picked the one piece and I said, I want to establish a relationship with this guy. And we did. And that, for me, it's been that way with so many composers. Even Corigliano, before he became really well known,
Yeah, right.
he had one little piece called the Elegy, written on the memory of his father. Very short, very beautiful. It was Barbaresque, actually. And on the basis of that, I started doing all of John's music too.
Yeah.
So it's got to start somewhere. But the main thing that you pointed out is that once you latch onto somebody who you really enjoy, you stick with that person. Now, every piece may not be
Right.
the gem, but it doesn't matter because the next one will be. I even have now today a couple of composers that I do and I trust. But interestingly enough, one of them is not American. And he's a guy you don't know. Nobody knows him in this country yet. Even though I've played his piece once. His name is Ferran Cruixent, and he's from Spain. He's got a voice. He's so good. There's all this stuff based on electronics where the orchestra has pre-programmed cell phones, and at certain points they do this and the various things that he's devised come out and they play over the whole orchestra. He's terrific. He's really good. I hope I can get other orchestras to agree to play his music. It used to be easier. Now it's hard. Everybody wants their own thing, you know. And you talk about being a proponent of living composers. The problem now is what happened to all the composers who came before. Piston, Sessions, Hansen, Diamond, Menon, all these composers who are great composers, they seem to have disappeared off the face of the earth because everybody wants what's the newest thing. And we can't ignore the history of music in this country. It just can't go on like this.
But see, your relationship to those living composers is very special because you could read a score the way you would read Brahms or your favorite Brahms versus your not favorite Brahms. You had the same kind of intensity of commitment to that. That's very unusual for conductors. Most conductors will, you know, they'll play somebody who's well known or somebody recommended them. And you have a very special relationship to the music itself. You have to believe
It
in
has to resonate
Yeah, exactly,
inside me.
exactly.
I mean, of course, like every conductor, I've done pieces that I really didn't want to do. And for the time when you have to, you must think that this is the best piece ever written, knowing that after you've finished it, you don't see it again. Or as I like to say sometimes, we are actually giving two performances tonight, first and last.
Well, see, the problem with traditional conductors is that 90%, 95% of the music played in the orchestral world is by dead.
Yeah, dead white male Europeans.
And they have to stand alone with this composer that they like. And a lot of them are not willing to do that because they think, well, I'm not sure because it doesn't have a tradition, and I'm not sure, if the weight is on me, if the burden is on me. If this fails, I'm responsible for this. They're afraid of that kind of choice. Yeah. And that's true of a lot of soloists also, yeah. Although that's changing. That's beginning to change. Mm-hmm. But so you started out very early, not even caring about all that.
No.
You just had a relationship with the score.
To me, that's what it was always about. But I think a lot of it is because of how I grew up, with my parents being part of the motion picture industry, right. Musical end, right. Also being involved in the chamber music that they did as the quartet, but also in the popular music industry with Capitol Records. I never had a limitation.
Or a bias.
Right. It was the Duke Ellington line. There are only two kinds of music, good music and the other stuff. So to me, I don't think about categorizing music right. In a way. So for instance, I might hear something of yours and go, there's some nice jazz influence stuff in here. Or I'll hear, here's a little bit of Stravinsky going on here. But I don't think of them as being separate idioms. They're just right. part of, that's what makes you. I'm looking for individuality in the pieces right. I do. I want to hear the voice of the composer. I don't want to hear what, look, we all go in a line. I don't think there's been an original piece in the last 25, 30 years where I go, that's something I've never heard before. No, the great pieces, the good ones, are ones that connect what has happened before, but finds a new way to express it, I think. So I'm always looking for people who is doing something with what has already existed and making it interesting, so I can find a parallel. It's like music always to me went on a line. You went Bach, and then you went forward a little bit to Haydn, and then you went to Mozart, and you went to Beethoven, you went to Schubert, and it kept going like this. Then we get the 20th century, Stravinsky and Schoenberg split it off, and coming right up the middle, popular music. All of a sudden, shows, vaudeville, minstrel, ragtime, all these other things sneak right in between Schoenberg and Stravinsky, and music now goes in all these directions.
Oh, yeah.
But still, the good composers like yourself knew, as we got to the middle and end of the 20th century, how to refashion what happened in the first 50 years and figure out how to make it something special for themselves, and found their own voice.
Yeah. Well, but see, that difference. See, that's the thing. I mean, you recognize it.
But
most people,
I lived through it.
Yeah.
I saw it change.
Well, one last thing, and this talk is related to this. We did a concert in Nashville, opening a hall, the Schermerhorn Hall, and it was a recording of all my music, and we invited the construction workers, the donors, anything that had anything to do with the building of this hall. And Leonard conducted, and it was all my music. It was about 50 minutes of my music, and we were all thinking, they're going to really have trouble with this, because these were people, a lot of them who had never heard an orchestra. They were country folk music, Nashville country music, and we were just sure that they were going to walk out within 10 minutes, right? It didn't happen that way. Do you remember that?
Oh yeah.
And the orchestra and Leonard and me were like, there was a 10-minute standing ovation, and I finally figured out what was happening. These people had no biases because they didn't know any better. They didn't know that this was, quote, contemporary classical music, so they didn't know what that meant. They were just listening to some music, and by this great orchestra in this hall that they had just built, which of course added to their enthusiasm, but still, it was a very genuine reaction.
It really was, and I think a lot of it was because the power of seeing that many musicians on stage. Think, these people probably have been to honky tonks, 4 or 5 people maybe.
Right.
Maybe they went to a country show where there might have been 20,000 people in the audience, but the group on stage was small. Right. Now, here was something, nothing amplified, natural sound that they helped create by building the hall.
That's right.
So they were connected automatically.
That's right.
And here was this sound coming off. I did that. I helped make that. I think that was really where the connection was.
I love the naivete, though.
Yeah, of course.
When
we
you
all
when
love
you don't
that.
have any pre-biases, it's a whole different.
That's why
living
you can.
experience.
That's why the key to everything in our society, especially when it comes to our artistic world, is education for the youngest possible ages. You got to get to people before those biases creep in.
Exactly.
So they at least have the palette of what is possible, and then can reject it later on.
Right, absolutely. Well, this has been such an honor having you here, and it's going to be a wonderful concert. Please come. You'll love it. It's all very good.
One more thing.
But we can't tell them what. All I can tell you is
there's a
there is a
surprise.
surprise at the end.
Okay.
And don't give us a walking ovation when pictures is over. Stick around because it's really cool.
There's a fun thing at the end.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Leonard, for being
Joan,
here.
it's so great
Thank
to
you
be
for
back
coming
with you.
here.